in Australia. I spoke about this after the meeting with the International Energy Agency Chief to the Minister for Energy and the Environment, Josh Frydenberg. Minister, thanks very much for your time. We've heard today from the head of the International Energy Agency, you've been meeting with him, that we're going to need carbon capture and storage to meet that Paris commitment of keeping global warming below 2 degrees. So what is, and he said Australia should be a leader in this, so what is Australia actually doing?
Well, we have a number of projects, demonstration projects that are currently underway. There's the Callide project in Queensland, there's the Otway project in Victoria, there's a carbon capture and storage institute in Victoria as well.
And these are all, what, research projects?
These are research, these are demonstration projects, but one practical one is the Gorgon gas facility off the coast of Western Australia, which will see up to 3 to 4 million tonnes of CO2 sequestered into geological formations under the ground.
That's their plan. They haven't done it yet, though.
They haven't done it, but they've invested, I think, more than a couple of $1 billion in that project, and that can reduce emissions by up to 40%. So the point about CCS is that the IEA and the IPCC say it's absolutely critical to meeting our Paris targets at an effective cost to include CCS.
But here's the question, does it work? I mean, there's all these projects, research, you know, we've had a decade of this under different governments, back to the Rudd government. Is it working anywhere in the world at a commercially viable scale?
Well, there's 2 big projects that are currently underway. One is in Texas, the Petronova project, and another one is called the Boundary Dam project in Canada. Both retrofitting existing coal-fired power plants with CCS, and both are important. There is also, you know, work underway in Japan, in China, and other countries into this area.
So what are those 2 projects you talk about there in Texas and in Canada? Is that what we're talking about? You're looking at retrofitting carbon capture and storage onto an existing power station?
Oh, we're looking at all our options, but the point is the Prime Minister's made very clear that we need to be technology neutral when it comes to meeting our emissions reduction targets. And that means coal has a role to play, gas has a role to play, and renewables increasingly have a role to play.
But when it comes to this CCS technology, again, is this what you're looking at as part of the suite of options?
Well, governments of both political persuasions in Australia have been investing significantly in CCS technology and research. And one of the current debates is around the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, obviously, and it currently, under its legislation, is restricted from investing in this area.
So you have to change that. What are the chances of getting that through the Senate?
Well, look, we are examining our options, but the point is it's a proven technology. Australia's chief scientist, Alan Finkel, who's conducting our review into energy security, has said that CCS, together with cleaner coal, is a legitimate and effective form of technology.
Is it a proven technology, though? I mean, you cite those 2 projects, but at what cost? At what cost?
Look, there are enormous costs in meeting all of our Paris targets.
But how does this one stack up? CCS, carbon capture and storage, cost-wise, compared to some of these other options like renewables and batteries and so on?
Well, it's about whether you want to keep baseload power into the system or whether you want to run the risk of having higher intermittent sources of power, namely wind and solar, and the instability that brings. So the costs are high. There's no doubt about that. And the technology is still making its way through the system internationally. But the point that the head of the IEA has made is that you do need to invest in it if you want to be serious about meeting your Paris targets.
Okay, but you'd have to change the legislation to use the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. What about the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund? Would that be easier to access that money, which is meant for big infrastructure projects in the north that banks won't finance?
Well, this is the responsibility of Matt Canavan, the Minister for Northern Australia, but he and others have made clear that this is one of the options that we're looking at.
So you are looking at that as well?
We're looking at the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, we're looking at the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, we're looking at how to get more gas into the market given the moratoriums and bans that are currently in place. We're looking at trying to harmonise these renewable energy targets that you're seeing pop up around the states, which are creating real problems with the system.
Even if there is some taxpayer support for carbon capture and storage, we still haven't seen any private investor say they'd be keen on doing it in Australia, have we?
But we have not had that proper conversation as yet. And this is the point of the Prime Minister's key priorities: security, affordability and lower emissions. We have to be serious about doing them all at once, and we have to be serious about a technology-neutral approach. We shouldn't be ruling out things if it means we can reduce emissions at an effective cost. One
private company, the Lion Group, is charging ahead with another big solar and battery storage project in South Australia at Roxby Downs. They say it would provide at least 100 megawatts of stored power you could use whenever you want. When the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, it would have prevented, they say, the blackout in South Australia. Is that right?
Well, more storage with renewables is a good thing. The blackout in South Australia was around 100 megawatts of load shedding that was required just last week. As you know, it varied depending on the blackout because there's been 4 in as many months.
But can solar and battery storage get around that?
Solar and battery storage can play a very important role. I mean, we have been investing more than $200 million through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA into more storage. Just last week, the Prime Minister and I announced that the CEFC would be providing more than $50 million as a form of a grant, as a loan, to support the Kidston project, which is a major solar project with the potential for pumped hydro. And just yesterday, we talked about how ARENA will be supporting a feasibility study into a pumped hydro project in South Australia.
How do they stack up, though, if you looked at the reliability of both battery storage and carbon capture and storage on a coal plant, and the cost? How do they compare?
Well, right now we don't have the battery storage that is sufficient on a big commercial grid scale.
So we can't have reliable batteries?
I mean, we're seeing really interesting innovations, David. For example, in South Australia, ARENA's put $5 million into a broader $20 million project with AGL to create 1,000 homes and businesses connected with both batteries as well as solar PV to create what is called a virtual power plant, which can supply excess stored capacity into the grid. Now, that can reduce some of the stresses on the grid, and that's a really interesting innovation. But the large scale, the 1,000 megawatts of storage, that you just don't have that capacity right now. And where carbon capture and storage can play a role is you can retrofit some of these big coal-fired power plants which provide that baseload power that you need.
Final one on this topic: where does with carbon capture and storage, where do the emissions actually end up in the Australian context?
Well, they're sequestered into the ground.
Okay, but
so into a geological formation, and they're kept under the ground.
Has much work been done on that part of the equation?
Well, certainly, for example, the Gorgon facility, that is what they're basing it on.
Well, that's an offshore, that would go into a saline aquifer.
It goes into, yeah.
If you were building one of these in the Latrobe Valley or...
well, Gippsland, for example, has been talked about. And as you know, they've got coal.
Store it under the ground in Gippsland.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are options.
All right. And that's safe?
Well, that's what we're told by the scientists, and we've got to go on the best advice possible.
Let me finally get your thoughts on Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister now here in Australia. First visit from a serving Israeli Prime Minister. I know you take a keen interest in issues there in the Middle East. Do you still support a two-state solution, and what are the chances of it actually happening now?
I absolutely support a two-state solution, and that is the position that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and others have articulated for some time.
Is it looking less likely now?
Well, I think what you do need is you need two partners for peace. And one of the problems to date has been that those two partners have failed to reach an agreement despite the best efforts of various US administrations and other friends of Israel and the Palestinians around the world. But this visit by Netanyahu, David, is very significant. It's the first time ever an Israeli Prime Minister has visited Australia, and the relationship has always had bipartisan support. That's absolutely critical, and as you know, Doc Evatt played a key role in Australia supporting Israel's independence back in 1948.
More recently, though, the Australian government did express concern about the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. Do you share that concern?
Oh, of course, and those issues have been articulated by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. But, good friends can have disagreements, but ultimately we stand side by side with Israel to ensure that its security is protected, and as well as to see the Palestinians have their security and to have a negotiated two-state solution. But what is really exciting as well about this visit is the opportunity for increased bilateral trade. The relationship's at about $1.2 billion of two-way trade at the moment, and Israel's known as the startup nation, and Australians are investing with great fanfare into Israel, and Israel also has a lot to offer Australia in the technology space.
Josh Frydenberg, thank you very much for talking to us.
Good to be with you, David.